the surface, underwater. Marine is always underwater. So I'm going to focus in on an important topic that I have been working on for the last 6 to 7 years. You might find it interesting. And those of you that will have questions, please, if I can't cover everything today, my email and contacts I will leave behind. Please feel free to contact me. So I will talk about marine technology and the law of the sea. Connecting technology with law. That's the gist of it all. Giving you a quick reminder, because you are so invested in studying law. So this is just I think most of you have studied physics, chemistry, biology as a basics, foundation as you walk through school, right? We all have an understanding of what science is, what its technology is. So I want to start with what is technology. So technology basically is made up of two words. Techne means art, craft, or skill, or the manner through which something is conveyed. And logos means expressing something or saying something. The word technology evolved in the 17th century, and during the 17th century, we had something called the First Industrial Revolution. It was around 1750 or 1760. Literature is not really clear when it started, but during that period, we had steam engines. We discovered coal. You know coal, the black thing you burn? We utilized coal, we transformed that into energy, and then we changed the way things are transported, how goods are produced. That was the first industrial revolution. 2025, we are in the midst of what we call fourth industrial revolution, from first to fourth, right? So technology is not just your cell phone. Technology is not just a camera. Technology is not just a car. Technology can mean anything. Technology can mean just about anything, right? So what technology does is it helps us differentiate between what is outside there, natural technology, and what is in here. This room, everything you see in this room, this is human technology, right? Technology can be inspirational. You see planes. Planes were inspired by birds taking flight. You wear something called Velcro. Velcro is what keeps materials together. Velcro was inspired by a plant called birds with prickly ends. You see structure, you see fabric that you're wearing. This is inspired by spider webs, weaving thread, right? We are inspired, and this is called technology as well. Technology versus science, a very quick reminder. We often use the word synonymously, which means when we talk about technology, we talk about science, but they are not the same. Technology is very different from science. How so? So, technology and science, they move between causes and effects in different directions. Cause and effect. With science, the objective is to understand the world and the underlying laws of nature. Nature has a law. You studied the naturalist law, positivist law, you've studied all of that, like Hugo Grotius on all of that, right? I believe, right? So basically it's about understanding nature and understanding the behavior. When you understand behavior, what scientists are doing is that they start with what we call known starting conditions, so we can predict unknown end results. What does this mean? Take, for example, a ball, a football. I want to throw the football to hit that wall over there. Now, if I know the direction, if I know the angle, if I know E is equal to mc squared, if I know gravity, I might just be able to throw the ball in the right direction. That is science. I'm predicting where that is going to land. With technology, it's a little bit different. It's the opposite way. With technology, we see what is happening, and then we go backtrack everything, and stand to see, okay, what is the source? Take, for example, climate change. 30 years ago, if you asked me, what is climate change? I wouldn't be able to answer any one of you. But we saw symptoms. It was getting warmer, the climate was changing, and today we know that this is climate change. 30 years ago, we didn't know that. So what scientists are doing today, they're looking at pollution, they're looking at the air, the concentration, and we're trying to backtrack that to understand what went wrong, and that is technology. Technology, it was used in the 19th century, that's when it started, but even in the 19th century, the German word technics was in common parlance, but later in the 20th century, technology replaced the German word. Technology is a body of knowledge. Technology is also a distinct body of knowledge. Why do I say that? Because what came first, the chicken or the egg? We don't know, right? Do you think that the plane was invented first or the theory was invented first, aerodynamics? The Wright brothers, they invented the plane first, then came the theory, steam engines. The steam engine came first, and then came what we call hydrodynamics, right? So it's basically the invention that came first. But in that sense, technology also draws on what we call tacit knowledge, which means we don't talk about it, you're thinking it, it's in your head, but it's not codified. You know what codification means, right? It's not codified anywhere, it's unarticulated and unconscious knowledge that provides the basis for further context or conscious mental states. It is tacit knowledge. But one thing that technology is not, technology can be many things. Technology is not science. Technology is not applied science, it is an application of the science. So, the nature of technology is one thing, it will either work or it will not work. This microphone, for example, now it's not working. This is technology, and then you adjust this and it works. Technology is a product, right? But I will come to this a little bit later. So, technologies also can be anything. It can be a computer that generates artificial functions, right? You get data, numbers, that's technology. Technology can be also produced by a problem-solving process that changes or transforms the world to meet a preconceived idea, design, plan, or knowledge, right? That generates artificial function. What does this mean? Long sentence. Long story cut short, you can use a disk. You know what a disk is? A CD disk. You can use a CD disk as a memory. You can collect data. Or you can use a CD disk to put your tea mug on it. You decide. That's what this means. Technology is also, it can be artifacts. Anything that is an object. I can touch this. I can touch this. This is a technology, right? It is an artifact that produces artificial functions, techniques, and a wider institutional regime for that to operate in. Yesterday I talked about IMO. Think about ships. I talked about autonomous ships, right? Think about Tesla, the vehicle industry. What has the vehicle done? It has created an entire regime around that. So lawyers can work and make some money, right? Good, yeah? That is your technology. Then the final one is, it is the outcome of a distributed co-evolutionary process in which functions, knowledge, artifacts, and their environment mutually adopt each other. What does this mean? Think about a tire. You know what a tire is, right? A wheel. Think about a wheel that goes round and round. You get the wheel, you put 4 wheels. On top, you put a carriage. You have a horse in front. You have a horse-driven vehicle. Now put an engine instead of the horse. Instead of the carriage, make it long, and that's your train. Take away 4 wheels, make it 3, right? Make it bigger, make it like a tube, give it wings, that's your plane. That's exactly what this means. So what has happened from the wheel to the carriage to the horse? Things have evolved. We don't live in the 16th century. Back then there were no engines, right? Now things are very different. So marine technology, what does that mean? Marine technology is very different. Why? Because there are different theories, different principles. Why? Why is marine technology different? There's only one response to that. On land, we breathe oxygen, right? There are other gases. Underwater, it's different. The environment underwater, where fish live, there's a society, I call it society, an ecosystem. It functions very differently. If you take a car, a Tesla, and try to drive it underwater, do you think it will work that good? Because the theories are very different, underwater and above land. I'm not going to go into deep, but this kind of invokes a lot of important questions. If you ever want to know where the definition can be found of marine technology, you can turn to this agreement. It's an international agreement. It's called the BBNJ agreement. I'm not going to make it complicated. I'm going to make it easy. If you look at the definition here, you see I've highlighted a lot of things in blue. I don't like this definition. It's not that simple. It takes into consideration many things. It talks about computer software, it talks about information, data, it talks about guidelines, it talks about experimentation, it also talks about knowledge and skills. Tell me, is this phone, which is I think is a technology, is it a knowledge? Is it a skill? No, it is not. It is something I can touch, it is something I can use, right? So very different, but that's why I don't like this definition, and it's okay to criticize. Remember, as students, you must learn how to critique. Everybody will have their own way. The theories, the principles that you will find in life, in higher studies, I will bring my theory, but never accept it. Criticize it. But criticism doesn't mean attack. Criticism means constructive ideas. Do you like it or you don't like it? That's the question. Here, I think it could have been a little more easier, but they've put everything in here, which makes it a little more condensed. But nevertheless, if you're looking for a definition on marine technology, you will find it in this agreement and nowhere else. The homework is done for you, right? Types of marine technology, there are many types of marine technology. I'm not going to go through all of this, and then there are subcategories of marine technology, and I want to talk about a little bit about ocean observation technologies, which is something that I work with. Ocean observation technology is something that observes, which is why it is a marine technology. There are many types of ocean observation technologies. You have something called a moored buoy. You can see the complexities, the complications in this, right? It doesn't go underwater, it stays above water. It gets the information you need. It stays in water using a chain and an anchor and a rope. You don't have to read too much into it. The slides will be here. If you're interested, you can look at it later on. Then there are technologies like, we call this a drifter. A drifter drifts and it creates a map of the ocean surface. And then it transmits the information to what we call a satellite, and the satellite relays that to the ground observation system. Unique technology. This this is a satellite. It uses something called an active sensor and a passive sensor. It sends the signal, and you know what reflection is, right? what we see in the mirror, a reflection. So it reflects the light, the radiation, and it backscatters it to the sensor, and the sensor detects it. There are more complicated jargons at play, which I'm not going to go into it. So satellite is also a part of the marine technology system. Then you have this technology. It goes down, then it goes straight, it goes down, and it goes up, and then it relays the information, and again you get the information to the ground-based system. Then you have another one that looks like an aeroplane, a tiny one. It's a glider. This one is very unique. It goes through to very remote areas. It observes oil spill. It does some bathymetry. It does a lot of important work. Again, a lot of complicated items here. As you can see, there is battery packs. It uses electricity. Battery is something that it uses, and it is something that is used by technologists to understand the temperature, current, and measurement. Technology failed. Let's do this one more time. Can you take it to the next slide, please?
Joel.
Can you take it to the next slide, please? Thank you. This is what we call a cabled observatory. You know what a lab is, right? Underwater, there's a lab. This is in Hawaii, on the seafloor. As you can see, there are cables, so it is called a underwater seafloor cabled observatory. It does a lot of important work there. Then you have this one. It looks like a big torpedo or a submersible. Very important technology. I'm not going to talk about all of them. This is called a Hagel lander. If you ever want to know, or if you're ever asked, which technology goes to the seafloor, you know, the floor I'm standing on now, every ocean has a floor. This is the only technology that can go to the seafloor. And as you can see here, you have a box-like thing. What it does is that it drops the box, it encloses an area, and it conducts oxygen measurement. Very important technology to understand the seafloor and what's happening there. Now, so you've had a little bit of an idea of what these technologies stand for, and this is called a plankton recorder. Plankton is very tiny microorganisms that float. They cannot swim by themselves, they float with the tides and currents. So this plankton recorder, what it does is that water enters this part, there's a silk band here, and the plankton gets stuck there, and you take the plankton, and then you study that later on. So this was maybe the hardest part. And then you have all of these different instruments that are tied to a marine technology. This is just for you to look at. You don't have to think too much about it. I'm going to talk about the law of it. I'm not here to talk about the technology, but it's extremely important to introduce these technologies. And my master's student, I go a little more deeper into these different technologies and how they're built. One of the important things, what is biodiversity? You see, there are many people in this room, right? We are not all the same. Indians, then bring in, I don't know, Swedish people. Then you bring in people from the US. Together, it's a diverse system with many different cultures, many different skin colors, gender, race. Underwater, there also exists biodiversity. There are different types of fish. There are different types of shrimps, right? We love seafood here, right? Chennai is famous for that. So you have a lot of diverse fishes, right? Altogether, it creates that society, and which is extremely important, right? So remember one thing, biodiversity means the variety of life, including species and organisms, and these species and organisms, they work together collectively in what we call ecosystem, and it is our moral duty to protect our species from extinction and have a healthy ocean. So there you will find that biodiversity is extremely important for protection and preservation of the marine environment. But today, the World Economic Forum estimates that 50% of the global GDP, it highly or moderately depends on biodiversity. But our biodiversity is declining. It's in a bad shape. That's why you have ocean governance, so we can take care of the biodiversity. Today, we try to understand biodiversity through two items. One is called sampling, the other one is called monitoring. What is sampling? Sampling is, in this room, if I pick one of you, you are a sample. If I pick one person, that is my sample for the room. If I test the sample, I will understand what's happening here. That's called sampling. And monitoring is the easy one. Monitoring is like, you have a teacher that's monitoring you during your exam. You might not be happy, but the teacher will be there. So that's called monitoring. Now, we do sampling, we collect DNA. Humans have DNA. Biodiversity has DNA. We collect. Have you ever seen a snake skin? Wow, good. Okay, so it's something like the species, they also shed their skin. Scientists go and collect that skin, they get DNA. DNA is in our skin. I think you already know that. They collect blood samples in the hospitals to study those. And then you have monitoring. As you can see, there are new technologies. You see, this is a shark. And there is a technology here. So technology is not just the technologies I've shown you earlier. The one like the plane, the one that goes to the sea floor. Technologies have evolved, right? So now it's like putting a technology on a dog that walks around the neighborhood and you get an idea. So technology works like that way. You can tag a technology, put a technology on a shark or a dolphin or a fish, and the fish goes someplace deeper, right? And gives you the information. What is it that you're doing through the technology? You are collecting data, right? Now, measuring data is extremely important. Think about it like this. You've entered or you've dived into a pool that has water. So the first thing you need to think is, how do you feel in the skin? Is it cold water? Is it warm water? We call that temperature, the water temperature. Then you will notice all of a sudden that you are moving. It's difficult to stand still. So you are getting a pressure. You're getting a pressure at the bottom. That's called your barometric pressure, right? Then some water goes into your mouth. It's salty, right? You want to think about the salinity, the level of salinity in the water, right? So what you're doing, temperature, salinity, pressure, these are the data. All of these are different types of data. That is why we send technologies down there, so we can compare what happened 5 years ago, what was the temperature, what was the pressure 5 years ago, and what is the temperature, what is the pressure after 5 years. We compare. That is how we know if things have changed in the ocean. Very simple version. Again, the slides will be there. We have something called EV, variables. It is numbers. We are collecting different types of numbers, different types of information. Today we have, the technologies are deployed to understand these 5 categories. The shortest answer to the question, why do we need marine technology? for these reasons. You have climate, you have ocean, you have biodiversity. Think about it like this. When you talk about biodiversity, you have landed on the moon. Think about this. You have landed on the moon and you want to know who lives on the moon. That's biodiversity. Is there men and women on the moon? Biodiversity. What do they eat? Biodiversity. What is their skin color? Biodiversity. All of these questions that relates to a biological form is a part of your biodiversity. You're trying to understand the diversity in the different biological forms. You don't have to remember any of these, but currently the most three important ones for climate change, for the triple planetary crisis I mentioned yesterday. Scientists, what they do in their labs is that they look at these three variables. Now, governance and the decade of ocean science. Now I'm going to slowly move towards the law. So we have a lot of important decades. How many years in a decade? 10 or 12? 10. Very good, never forget that. There are many decades under the UN system. Somebody talked about the UN system. How can we improve that? So there are many UN decades, 21 to 2030, 22 to 2032, 2024, and 2033. The most important one for this decade, for the ocean or maritime, you have UN Decade of Ocean Science. It started in 2015, there was a report, and the report painted a very horrible picture that our ocean health has declined. And what the UN Decade wants to do, it wants to put everybody behind a common governance framework, a legal framework, so they can improve the health of the ocean, which is wonderful. And so we have 5 years left. Remember one thing as students. Innovations have improved. We understand our oceans more than we did 10, 20 years ago. We understand our oceans because of technology. Technology goes underwater. You've seen the different complicated technologies, right? You don't have to remember those. But you must remember one thing. Technology is not Superman. Technology will not give you the solutions. Technology is there to give you information, data, numbers. What will save you is the law. And that is extremely important that you need to know. If you have the legal framework, that will be the Superman for you. Law is the Superman. Lawyers are Superman for me, right? So, unfolding governance challenges. I want to go one by one very briefly. I don't have much time. Let's see. Challenge one. Challenge one does not want to go, but okay. Challenge one. What do you see on the screen? Quickly, tell me. Organizations? Yes? Too many organizations. Who is saving the ocean? Tell me. Everybody's saving the oceans. Or so they would have you believe, which is wonderful. They're doing a fantastic job. But should it be too many organizations? Think about this college. One director managing 20,000 people, students. Everything should be under one, then the management is good. Who is managing whom? Right? If there were 15 directors for the 15 law colleges, that would be rather difficult. There would be overlaps in roles and responsibilities. It should always be centralized. One organization. Remember, for the next 30 years, try to bring centralization. If you go towards PhD, or whatever you study in the future, if you go in academia, if you go on the organizational power of things, always move towards centralization. Decentralization is a wonderful concept. If it works, it works. Congratulations. If it doesn't work, move towards centralization. Otherwise, there is less coordination. When there's less coordination, things do not work. This organization, for example, it takes in information and data to exchange, which does a very good job. This organization has over 100 NODCs. That's 100, and this is just one organization. They host hundreds of national oceanographic data centers. How does it work? How does it function? 100 data centers. Do we need 100 data centers for the world, or do we need one data center for the world? Move towards coordination. So, when we turn to the UN Decade of Ocean Science, there is something called Challenge 9. It talks about something very important, global north versus global south. This is the most contemporary issue you will find. The difference between the developing country and developed country, it still remains, right? I don't like the word developing country, I'm sorry. It does not make me feel good. I hate being treated developing. And when the discrepancy remains, that's when things go south. And that is not okay, right? You can talk about colonialism. You can talk about many things, right? Which comes into play in the subcontinent, right? What if? But unfortunately, the reality is that there is a major discrepancy, and that's why there needs to be equitable access to data, to technology, to information, and comprehensive capacity development. You think, today you might think sitting here, oh, we don't need marine technology, we don't need this lecture, but you don't know that. Because through this, contributing through this, you will be contributing to capacity development, through infrastructure development, through many developments, right? This topic itself contributes to the government of India in many different ways. Why? Because you have the Indian Ocean region, you have the Bay of Bengal at your disposal, right? Yeah, you need to observe what's happening in the Bay of Bengal, for example. Challenge 2, I'll just go very quickly. Technology governance. All this time I've talked about law. What about the technology? Focus on this technology, right? Do you know what law exists for this technology? When it doesn't work, I'm looking at him, right? And you're looking at me. That doesn't help it. You need to know the law. Every product comes with a law. In the European Union, we focus on the technology. So for example, a question for you. Traffic lights, when you're driving a car, or you're sitting in, what's it called, rickshaw? Auto rickshaw, right? So you're sitting in an auto rickshaw, and you're at the junction where you're crossing it, and there's a red light. You're in technology, and that is the law, right? That governs the technology. Every single technology needs to be governed through law. Not because lawyers need to make money, which we do, but it is because if technology is not governed through law, there will be too many technologies. There will be too many problems. There will be too many litigations, too many cases. And that creates a jam, a traffic jam in the court of law, right? And that is something we don't want. It slows down the judicial process. Technology needs to be governed. A plane accident, a train accident, a car accident, a rickshaw accident, auto rickshaw accident. You need a law for everything. And that's called technology governance. I'm not going to go into this anymore. So question, how many of you have operated a drone or a technology? Hands up. A drone, an aerial drone? No? You have? Oh, good. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, good. Is it legal in India? In Sweden, it's not. I have a drone. I've never used it. How many of you, the 5 of you, have you received an official training to fly a drone? Did you receive any instructions? No, you just put in the battery and it flew, right? How many of you are familiar with the rules and requirements of a drone? Okay. Which brings me to my next topic. So, if ever you wanted to know about what's happening with the rules and requirements, we have this. I hope it comes up. So, what you see here, I'm not going to read this. This is a framework I have developed under a multi-million-dollar project for the European Commission. This is a blueprint. Starting from definition, you have to define it. In law, you have the definitions, the Latin terms, right? You have to define things, right? You have to understand what is preemptive strike. You have to understand what is mortgage. You have to understand mens rea. You have to understand actus reus. You have to understand all these terminologies. Otherwise, you will not understand anything, right? So everything starts with a definition. You have to separate things. You have to consider both operational things. You have to consider the autonomous things. You have to consider data management. All of these things come into play. The slides will be with you. Those that are interested in technology law, dive deep in. There are 5 strands, and there are 8 blocks. And this is called the technology policy interface. It is exactly in this slide where technology meets law. Exactly, this is the point where techno-regulation starts. Okay? Challenge 3. So, problems today we have in ocean conservation. We have problems with funding. We have problems with partnerships. We have problems with transparency. We have problems with data sharing, a lot of problems. That's why we don't understand the ocean so well. Too many problems in the laws for technology. That is why it is still a contemporary and emerging trend and challenge. I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to move towards the next challenge. Important. So, maritime zone. How many of you are familiar with the law of the sea and maritime zones? Hands up, please. Yeah, I'm not going to count you. So you know the law of the sea. Let's talk a little bit about law of the sea. So you stand on the coast, go to the beach, look towards the water, and this is where we are, right? This is exactly where it starts. This is the coast. As we move from the coast towards the sea, yeah, you will see that there is a rock formation underneath. There is upper slope, plateau, terrace. There is lower slope, rise, ocean deep. That's the rocky part of it. For maritime, you need water. There is no maritime without water. You need some sea level. Let's bring in some water. Where does the maritime zone start? The maritime zone starts from the territorial sea baseline. It's a line, it's a baseline, it's a foundation. This baseline divides the internal waters from what we call the territorial sea. Just listen in, I will explain a little further. Just observe the terms. Internal waters, and then we have 12 nautical miles of territorial sea, right? Then we have the contiguous zone, that is 12 nautical miles. And then we have the exclusive economic zone, that is 200 nautical miles, and underneath we have this. So, internal waters, territorial sea, and contiguous zone. What does this mean? What is the power here? The government of India has a power here. How many of you live in an apartment? How many of you live in an apartment? How many of you live in a dorm? How many of you live in a house? All of you live in a house, most of you live in a house. What powers do you exercise in a house? Ownership, possession, actual ownership, actual possession. A house is where you exercise supreme authority. In your house, if you own the land, if you're the owner of the land, you have the power. You can destroy your house, you can build it up again, you can refurbish, you can refurnish, you can renovate. That power is called sovereignty. The power of sovereignty. That is exactly what the government exercises in these areas. The power of a house, don't forget. It's called zones of sovereignty. And then you have the exclusive economic zone, you have the continental shelf. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. can I please do this manually myself down there? Can you give me the laptop, please? Needs to be connected there. Yes. Okay. Do I need the wire? Thank you. Okay, I'll do it like this. That's walking for me. Good. So, the power of a house, right? What you exercise as an owner. Here, you have exclusive economic zone, which stretches from the baseline, 200 nautical miles, and you have something called the continental shelf. The continental shelf is the part underwater. That is your continental shelf. You don't have to remember these terms. And then some exercise extended continental shelf. What power does the government of India have in this one? How many of you live in a dorm? Apartment. University dorm. Apartment. Nobody lives in an apartment? One person lives in an apartment. Anybody else? Wow, you guys are rich. Everybody lives in a house. Nice. Okay, so apartment. You know what an apartment is, right? Yes? The difference between an apartment and a house. What right do you have in an apartment? The legal term is a tenant. You are a tenant. You rent an apartment. You pay money every month, right? What can you do in a house that you can't do in an apartment? You cannot break the apartment and build it up, right? In a house, you can do that. Before you renovate, you need to seek permission, right? You cannot create a door in the middle of the apartment so you can meet your neighbor every other day because you're best friends. You cannot break anything. You cannot break the walls, right? You cannot break the tiles, the floor of the apartment. The right you exercise in an apartment is exactly the right you exercise in that. It's called sovereign rights. Zone of sovereignty is the house and zone of sovereign rights. Let me explain this a little bit more. So there's a little bit of a problem. In one of the pictures you saw a shark with a technology, right? So if someone from Myanmar or someone from Bangladesh sends a shark with a technology into your waters, what will the government of India say? No, you can't, right? Some scholars think that it is okay. Why? Because you are collecting data. It's a part of technology. Remember, technology gives you data and the numbers, and it is important to understand what is happening with the ocean. But in that sense, it cannot violate the sovereignty, or it cannot implicate the sovereign jurisdiction of India. And things have changed from having a technology, a vehicle, or one of those gliders or a drifter underwater, to a shark or a dolphin having a technology around it to observe the ocean. It has cameras, it has sensors, right? Things will change, things have changed. So I'm not going to go deep into this. I will move forward with challenge 5. The next challenge is, so you have your different maritime zones, right? You have your different maritime zones, and when you put a technology to understand the ocean, you have to make sure that the technology goes into all of these different layers. All of these different areas, the technology should be able to reach. You need to get a sample from each and every one of those technologies. But then the question is, what is the law that governs all of these specific areas for technology? Whether you go into internal waters, whether you go into the territorial sea. What is the law there? Currently, there is no law, right? And that is why we are not getting the right information. Challenge number 6. So, I talked about this in a conference that was hosted by Gujarat Maritime University. When we send a technology down in the ocean, does it create problems? Because at the end of the day, a technology is meant to give us something good. But if you send a technology underwater, how will that work? If there's something wrong with the technology, will there be any liability, right? So we have different types of technologies. We have what we call, have you seen a wind farm, offshore wind farm that goes like a fan, it moves? You've seen an offshore wind farm, right? That offshore wind farm is stuck to the ground of the water. There are different species there. There's an ecosystem there, and that creates a problem for that. And then we have those periodic technologies. I've shown you the pictures. We're sending these. If India sends 20 technologies, US, Russia, Sweden, Canada, Germany, Croatia, Belgium, everybody starts sending 20 technologies in the water, how much problem are we creating? Yet we need to know these information, right? So, what are the types of liability that can be at play here? Usually there are three people involved in a fault-based liability system. You have a manufacturer, you have an owner, and you have an operator, right? In all of this, these people have to exercise due diligence and reasonable care. Just like your contract law, buyers beware, right? Similar to that fashion, you need to exercise due diligence, but technology can fail. You remember I talked about that technology can be a problem. It functions or it malfunctions. I mean, that was a good example for the clicker. That's why I'm standing here. So the technology was functioning and then it stopped functioning. If it malfunctions, then you have to understand liability. For that, you have to connect the fault, the problem, to the person. And we do that usually by asking the question, was the connection between the fault and the person that has deployed the technology close or remote? Remote means far away. For example, if there are three people here, if there are three people standing beside me, and we fly a drone and it hits one of you, there are three people, three drones, you need to understand whose drone hit you, whose drone fell on you and hurt you, injury. Then you can take me to the court for money, right? But in this case, fault-based liability, you have to connect the drone, the injury, to me. And that is all about fault-based liability. Then you have something called vicarious liability. For an organization, the employee is held responsible. A manager is held responsible for the work of a subordinate, a principal for his agent, and then an operator will be responsible for technology. Which means top management, while you can delegate the responsibility, remember one thing, you can delegate the responsibility, but the blame will always be yours, right? If the prime minister sends somebody to do a job, and that person fails to do the job, it will be the prime minister that will be held responsible, not the person. That is the theory of delegation. Then you have something called strict liability, which is tied to the product. In this case, we are looking at the technology itself. It is not the owner or the operator that will be held responsible. It will be the producer, the person that produces the technology, and you need to tie that to what we call defective product. Tying that to the defective product, okay. And we have this directive that gives us an idea of what a defective product might be. It's the same as buyers beware. You buy a cloth or a fabric under contract law, I think you've studied this, right? You have to be careful. The same way you have to exercise due diligence for a product before you buy that or deploy that. Solutions, there are many. You might think about international law, you might think about industry. If the technology industry can do something, but both have problems. International law is soft law, But industry law is more like taking advantage. I'm doing what is best for me, and there are many industries that deal with technology. So neither is the best solution. You can't say international law is the best or industry or self-regulation is the best. What you want to do is consider how to move forward. What are the considerations? Global North and Global South need to come together. You need to look at developing standards, developing rules and requirements for technology. You need to have review and continuous measurement and monitoring of the technology. You need to bring people together. It's not just the engineers that should work with technology, it's the lawyers that should also work with technology to develop the law. Concluding remarks. We have a lot of ships. You know that we have a lot of ships, and then we have plastic pollution. Anything that goes in the ocean is a problem. That's why we try not to litter, right? But remember one thing, technology, at the end of the day, it's nothing but a product. There is no ontological grounds for saying that a technology should be a human being. A technology should not have civil rights, but it should have liability. Go back to company law. Company law tells you that a company has a fictitious personality, right? So it has rights, as I mentioned yesterday. A technology will have the same form of liability, but who decides that? Engineers? No. It is something that is subject to law. If you invented a time machine today, and that time machine hurt someone, and the injured person goes to the court and says that I want my relief, I want my remedy, the judge cannot fold his hands and say, hey, I don't have any laws on time machine. I cannot give you your relief. The court has to exercise due diligence and unleash the law that exists. Whatever law exists, the court has to take that into account. And that is what marine technology is all about. It's the same as any other technology. It will have liability. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time. I will have to take a bow. It was really an honor and a privilege to be here before you for the second day. My contacts are here. Reach out if you have questions. Thank you.
Since we are running out of time, I request the second speaker, Dr. Ramesh Sitapu, to take up the stage. At the end, we can